All right, everybody, thank you so much for a really, really good turnout. Looking forward to this wonderful evening. And as you know, really, really exciting for our team after our rebrand as Nature on Tap. So yeah, exciting times ahead. We're really looking forward to this initiative and taking it further and taking it to a lot of other towns, not just in South Africa, hopefully further afield as well. So just before we start, just a couple of thank yous. Firstly, Painted Dog TV for always coming out, filming the talks. I know a lot of people that can't make it on these nights then have the opportunity to catch up. So give it a couple of days, and normally that'll be available on their YouTube channel. Then also thank you very much for Thirsty Giraffe for giving us a venue and somewhere to host these talks. Always lucky having a nice relaxed atmosphere, and I see loads of beers in the audience, which is always quite good. And then lastly, to the Scales Conservation Fund, who have partnered with us for fundraising to support people who support nature. So for whoever was or was not here last time, one of our new initiatives is to look at doing some fundraising through donations, that we can kind of find people that do proactive and really influential conservation work, not just in the Lowveld, but further afield, and try and help them out wherever we can. So if anybody would be interested in donating to that, I can maybe suggest chatting to Lindy or Sarah during the course of the evening or afterwards. So yeah, please get in touch if you're keen on that. So one or two ground rules just to quickly mention. As soon as the talk is done, if we can just ask everybody to just move outside and just hang around there. Give Thirsty Giraffe about 10 minutes. They do need to set up tables and chairs for meals afterwards, so they're going to have to clear out this area. So please, if you can, just give them 10-15 minutes at most, and then they'll be ready to go. So yes, without further ado, tonight we're really, really lucky to have the Bateleurs presenting here. Okay. All right, everybody, sorry about that. Minor problem, but we'll sort it out. So yeah, again, tonight I'm sure a lot of you in this audience have heard of the Bateleurs and the incredible work that they're doing, not just in our area, but throughout Southern Africa and further afield. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Steve, who's going to explore the type of work that they do and some of the incredible impact they've had over the years.
Thanks very much, folks, for that warm round of applause. It's lekker to get a welcome. And I'm not used to audiences this size, so I'm quaking here. We'll usually go and deliver at some small lodge, and it might be 15, 20 people, so this is tremendous. And thank you. You've obviously all driven far, and that's really appreciated. So any exposure the Bateleurs can get, we love it. To just spread the word, and that's what this evening is all about. Who are the Bateleurs? What do they do? Where do they do it? How do they do it? So I'm going to give you a little history of how it all started. And from there, I'm going to take you through a day in the life of a Bateleur pilot. But before I carry on, how many Bateleur pilots are there here tonight? Jeff, put your hand up. Marlon is in the back there. There's another. Jaco, who's that? So, okay, I see about 5 hands. That is fantastic. And a special welcome to the Bateleur pilots. You'll find out as we go through here that the biggest heroes, the angels with wings, and the people who give up the most for the Bateleurs are the pilots. They are just tremendous, and you'll see why in terms of how big the give-up is that they make. Let me crack on. Your speaker this evening, I came from a background in aerial photography. I spent 15 years with that as my sole source of income, and I kind of figured in the early days of my aerial photography, where is a place that I can now make my community give up? Some people tithe something in their church, put something in the bowl that's going around, join Rotary or Lions Club, Lions International. I figured I want to use this vehicle of the aircraft to do my payback. And that came in the form of the Bateleurs. It was fantastic. It was an immediate marriage. I've loved it and worked nicely with it ever since. So this presentation is not a Steve-centric presentation, please. It might look that way, but that's because of a background in aerial photography, and I happen to have an arsenal of images available to make a nice image-rich presentation where my colleagues possibly don't. But this really is a day in the life of a Bateleur pilot, as I said, and any one of those 5 fellows who put their hands up earlier could deliver the same presentation. Where did it begin? The Isimangaliso wetland, St. Lucia, and the Richards Bay mineral mining is where the Bateleurs had its birth. This mining of titanium out of the huge dunes just north of Richards Bay was working its way, crawling along, going northwards, with these terrible dredges that would turn the dunes upside down and extract the titanium. And they, of course, said, oh no, we're doing our bit to rehabilitate after the mining, which is great, because sometimes these days you don't get any attempted rehabilitation at all. So the fact that they were doing this monoculture of casuarina trees was just not good. And Dr. Ian Player, who was our patron in the Bateleurs, the late Dr. Ian Player, he said, no ways, this rows of casuarina trees doesn't do it. There were over 200 species of trees within the indigenous forests. And there on the bottom right, you see the indigenous jungle that would be on the front of those dunes. And those forests would catch the morning dew that would come out of off the ocean with a sea breeze. You'd always have that fog coming in, and it would make droplets. And the droplets would run down onto the sand and go through the sand, and that over eons of time would create a capillary structure, not unlike the veins in our bodies. And eventually, not unlike if you spray a hosepipe against a great big plate glass window, every drop that starts running doesn't bounce off the other drops. It congregates with the next drop, and it eventually becomes a trickle. And the trickle would emerge into the St. Lucia wetland as an aquifer of fresh water. And one year, the Umfolozi and the Mkuzi rivers dried up during a drought. And Ian Player decided, here we go, this is the time. And he asked Nora Creyer, who was the founder of the Bateleurs. And I think that, yes, there we have Nora in the foreground, who became nicknamed the Mother Teresa of aviation. And along with Ian Player and Credo Mutra, who was a community consultant that they made use of very often as an influential person in the local communities. Nevertheless, what happened there was Nora was a person who could organize stuff. She was just one of those go-to people, and she put an aircraft together, and Ian Player put a bunch of proper conservationists, people from the Department of Fisheries, Forestry and Environment, as it's known today, and even the manager of RBM, Richards Bay Mineral Mining, can you believe it, was in the flight? And he took them and he said, have a look at this. It was the best way of demonstrating it, is that the hippos and the crocodiles were gathered, not in their hundreds, but in their thousands, in clusters around where these aquifers were venting into the saline estuarine system. So had they not had that fresh water, they would have died in their thousands. And it was because of that flight and the ability of the aerial observation that Isimangaliso was soon thereafter declared a World Heritage Site and became the Isimangaliso that we know today. And of course, there was the launch of the Bateleurs. Nora decided, this is it. The power of the aerial perspective is just tremendous. She's got to roll with it. And of course, started recruiting pilots, literally one at a time, going to airfields and asking fellas to come along and join. What we're going to show next is a video, and it really is a lekker video. I could probably now go home after this video because it tells everything. But a nice, interesting aspect of the video is the producer of the video is a certain Todd Beck from America. And he, believe it or not, even knew of the fella here in South Africa who does that Snakes in the City program. That very tattooed guy and his lady who goes with him. And Todd says to us, my goodness, if that guy can still go 4 seasons down the track, pulling mambas out from behind refrigerators and it still remains relevant, well then heck, with what we do, he says, you're going to 10 seasons. So he came along and put together with our assistants this sizzle reel, as he calls it, because he says that at a spur stake ranch, you don't get drawn in there by the stake, it's the sizzle that gets you in there. And he uses this to go now to the big channels, Netflix, National Geographic, and so on, to try and sell the Bateleurs story. So folks, enjoy this. Hold thumbs for us that this video actually gets traction with those channels, because then we're really made if we get in there. And of course, he got some things wrong. For example, our poachers don't wear branded clothing and wear earmuffs when they're shooting a rhino. But
our world has never been in more danger, and that's especially true in the wilds of Africa. Over 11 million square miles of untamed wilderness, an ecosystem unlike anywhere else on the planet, where the effects of climate change, industrial development, and poaching are pushing the region to its tipping point. But there's still hope. Countering these unrelenting forces is a group of more than 200 civilian pilots and their aircraft, the world's most unusual all-volunteer peacetime air force, dedicated to protecting Africa's beloved wildlands and creatures from the sky. With support from wildlife management experts, researchers, and environmentalists, they are the Bateleurs. and this is their mission.
We've got a massive problem with conservation across the world, and especially here in Africa. We have an amazing crew of 200 pilots and aircraft that give up their time and back into conservation. And with aircraft, we can do so much. Aerial surveys, anti-poaching, coastal river damage, demining. We've been doing this for 25 years now, and so much more work still needs to be done.
Spread throughout the cities, towns, and private nature reserves of South Africa, the Bateleurs are always nearby, on call, and ready to take flight, giving us a bird's eye view of one of the largest conservation opportunities on Earth, drawing on lessons from natural history as they work to secure our shared natural future.
Bateleurs provide a wonderful novel service by making available volunteer pilots with their aircraft to support us in a range of activities.
The world needs us to stand up and be strong, now more than ever.
There is no greater privilege than to work in a career where you feel that you're making a difference.
I really love my job because it actually combines my two passions, conservation and flying. Our impact becomes so much greater when we take up to the skies.
Fasten your seatbelts. This is Air Rescue Africa.
Check one. I just want to do a volume check because we turned the sound up on the microphone thinking it would work on the speakers, but they're on their own sound system, so no problem. But it's not too loud, it's fine, I think. Yeah, that's great. Right, there we have the old guard. On the left, Avroy Schlein, the ladies will all know him. He's the cosmetics mogul of yesteryear. A very famous person and now our chairman, would you believe? And at age 80-something, and he forbids me to tell you exactly 80 how much, but he's still flying, and he is a businessman of note. If the Bateleurs ever need somebody to go into war on some sort of a legal or business battle, we send Avroy, and we soon have the folks quaking. The late Dr. Ian Player and the late Dr. Keith Cooper, both famous conservationists in South Africa, and Paul Dutton, who is still a Bateleur member, although medical reasons have prevented him from flying. And we do have that happening with the pilots. As they get on, I might be in that queue next. This fella is a famous conservationist in South Africa. He's headed up many a program at the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and John will know him very well. They've worked in close collaboration, and John, who introduced the evening, of course, as you all know, is with the Birds of Prey section of Endangered Wildlife Trust. So we have kindred spirits here, and I like to actually suggest that Andre is my guest presenter here this evening, or co-presenter, because he's featured 2 or 3 times, and to have a conservationist like this be able to present is fantastic, because that tells us from the conservationist perspective of their value that they place in the Bateleurs. It will all be very well for me to stand here and say we have a great time flying and we do all this marvelous stuff, but is it of any worth to conservation? And Andre tells us that.
My relationship with the Bateleurs goes back a long way, more than 20 years. The first flights I ever did with them was in a place called Bateleurs in Mpumalanga, looking for crane nests, flying a little trike. And at that stage, it really assisted us in getting into these wetland areas that are often very difficult to traverse. And since then, I've used them on numerous occasions for various jobs in areas across South Africa, but then also in terms of work beyond our borders in more recent times. The benefit of having the Bateleurs support the work that we do are manifold, but I think a key component of that, working within the NGO environment in conservation over the last 20+ years, is that, as always, we are very often resource-strapped, and the Bateleurs provide a wonderful novel service by making available volunteer pilots with their aircraft to support us in a range of activities.
Okay, enough of introductions, and I hope that didn't take too long. Let's jump right into what does a Bateleur pilot do. And the first thing that happens with the pack and the prep, of course, is cameras. And I'm not saying this because I'm an aerial photographer, but a key component of conservation these days has become high tech and photography and all that goes with that. The camera equipment is used extensively. Here we see the transects as presented to us by the ecologist in the game reserve. They decide the separation between the transects based on what you're going to be able to visually pick up on the ground. And you'll have observers on the left and the right of the aircraft. And I'm sure I'm chatting to a lot of conservationists here this evening who've been doing this work. So let me not dwell on that for too long, other than to say that the conservationists want us operating in the treetops. And we want to go up there where we've got a bit of money in the bank for when that engine stops running. Because the propeller in an aircraft at the end of the day is simply a fan to keep the pilot cool. We all know this, you see. So when that thing stops, then the sweating starts. So we asked to go up, and they stress, they say, no, we can't see the animals on the ground. So we find a happy medium, and we'll go and fly those transects as closely as we can, photographing what we get to see. And here it's very easy. 5 large animals in short grass, similar there, but now it starts getting exciting. And Impala is important. Laurel, my wife, who's traveled with me now and chief supporter, and I came through the Kruger Park for 2 days on the way to get here, because for a person who loves wildlife and conservation, why come on the road through the villages and the towns? You'd rather go in the Kruger Park. And of course, we saw Impala that we think, well, there's millions of them. Does it matter to know how many there are? But I learned that it's very important, because you get the browsers and the grazers. And let me not start an education and conservation here, but by being able to learn the carrying capacities of your territory is very, very important. And you can gauge that by the increase and decrease in numbers. That particular herd of giraffe there, I always ask, Impala. I'm just checking if you're paying attention. How many are there? I get offers of 20, 25, until you now go and zoom in, and the ones that were in complete camo, hidden in the shadows and so on, the camera tells us that there's 38 there. So therein lies the importance of now introducing photography into what used to be the days of simple observation and a clipboard. That goes another step further, where just like your cell phones, when you shoot a pic with a cell phone, the cell phone knows exactly where the picture was taken. Same with all the modern cameras. And we then take the geolocation of each image shot of these herds and put it down onto the transects or onto the track of the flight. The ecologists love it, because now not only do they get those accurate counts, but they know that herd X is always in this bottom or top northeast corner of this place. And that starts now determining territories and ranges of various animals. So it all adds value to the actual census that happens. There's another situation. If you try to count that on the ground, you're going to have to do it with a canoe or wearing a set of waders and being very nervous of the crocodiles. But you go in there with a canoe and all you see is a forest of trees. How are you going to count them? Whereas I can tell you with 100% accuracy how many flamingos are there. And why on earth would you want to know how many flamingos? Quite simply, they're mobile. Yeah. They don't adhere to fences like all the other animals. And if they don't like the wetland, they're moving out. So an increase or a decrease, or alternatively a stable population of your waterfowl is a huge indicator of the health of your wetland. If you've got sewage works upstream or mining that's occurring and it's contaminating the water, they're going to be the first to bail. So very important to include that in the study. And the only way to do that is with aviation. This was now a movement of animals, getting onto the more practical side of things. And these were all tortoises. They were collected over approximately a 10-year period in KZN. And the environmentalists, the Free Me Wildlife, who are the custodian of these tortoises, say that most of them come from people in wild areas or in game reserve who see this little thing and think, oh, cute, they can't help themselves, they take it home. But 10 years later, it's yay big and weighs 140 kgs, and now they don't know what to do with it, you know. Well, they're moving house and they can't move with the tortoise, whatever. So they've recovered these, a lot of them confiscations by wildlife authorities and given into the care of Free Me Wildlife, who now decided it was time to go and put them back into their endemic range and to rewild them. So, of course, 3 days spent in a vehicle or a bakkie in the searing heat that we have at that time of year in February would just have been detrimental to their well-being, so they got flown. And our pilot says that this is the toughest game of Tetris he ever played in his life, was to get all these boxes. We all know in aviation, of course, that any user of aviation, including ourselves, when we board an aircraft, we lie about our weight. And the hand luggage is a little bit oversized, out of spec, so is the check-in luggage, and of course it happens with us as well. Paperwork. We make sure that our pilots don't get into trouble. We would hate for a landing to occur at some other country runway, and there happens to be an inspector from the department. And the poor pilot gets arrested because he's carrying CITES contraband animals, thinking it's for the greater good, and yet there's no permit. So just a little technical pause there is to say that we make sure that any required paperwork is in order before we do the flying. Of course, we transport lions. This, in fact, happened yesterday. Lorel was with me on the veranda of Jeff Dyer, Bateleurs pilot's deck here where we're staying, courtesy of Jeff and Linda. Thank you very much. And I was chatting with this guy this morning. He was giving me the debriefing on his transport of the lions. It was fantastic to get the good news. But reason for these transport, more often than not, is establishment of new game reserves, which is what he was doing. He was moving 2 lions from Kamdaboo in the Eastern Cape to the new Babanangu Game Reserve in KZN. And that is simply an introduction of big 5 species into the game reserve. But more often than not, the reason for us moving the animals is quite simply for purposes of genetic diversity. You know, lions are quick breeders, and they get introduced, and mankind is fantastic, folks. They build these game reserves at tremendous expense, put up the fences, bring in the animals, but then it doesn't take too long before these lions are starting to take an interest in their own daughters. And it's not very healthy. So what we very often have been asked to do by the ecologists is to move, let's say, a coalition of 2 male lions from game reserve A to B, and to take lions from B and move them back to A. And what our game services have learned, and I've come to learn over the years, that South African veterinary services, or wildlife veterinary people and ecologists, are just the world's best. They go into the greatest detail and know exactly what they're doing. The professionalism is incredible. If you look there, for example, why the little mask on the lion? Would you know? COVID. I don't know who said that, but you get points for the wittiest comment so far this evening. And let there be more, please. Under anesthetic, just like with humans, the pupils dilate. Now it lies there with its eye open, with its head on the side, eyes pointing straight at the sun with a dilated pupil. It's going to get arc eyes, just like we do if you go welding without a welding helmet on. It's going to hurt it. You don't want a predator who's got bad eyesight. The other eye, on the ground side, has got the spiking of all the leaves and the doringboom and whatever. So down to that last little detail, they really, really take care of everything. The aircraft get a mattress in them. They also get a lining, thank goodness, for the aircraft owner, because cat pee is bad and lion pee is worse. A little interesting thing, by the way, is that these animals are transported like this rather than in a box or a cage. A completely wild lion that has never had human handling before, put into a cage, it comes around from the anesthetic and just goes bananas. They've been known to cause severe self-destruction in their efforts to get out of the box. They go crazy. So transported without a cage and a low level of sedation is the way forward. And it really works, and they do move around. It's like one of us having a nightmare or a bad dream. This thing's under this shallow sedation, it starts moving. And I was actually flying with a fellow once, and a paw came and plopped between the 2 front seats in the aircraft in the cockpit. And this colleague of mine, Tony, says, "That's it." He says, "If they ever ask us to do this again, I'm bringing a gun." So I say, "Tony, you can't bring a gun. We're conservationists. We can't be shooting the lions." He says, No. It's not for the lion. It's for me." Anyway, here we see the fruits of our labors. This is the progeny of 2 male lions transported within a year. They've now got new family in a new territory. Let's move along. The big ones, the Ellies, also for reasons of genetic diversity, and I think a lot of people here in this room, we got to look at that again, huh? By the way, he's wearing a stylish pair of shades, and I want to find out what brand they are, because they're bulletproof. They're bloody good, I tell you. These two particular ellies were specifically chosen. We all know that story of Pilansberg 15 years ago, where it was assumed that you can't transport huge elephants. You'd rather select smaller ones. And they then landed up with these bunch of rogue youngsters who were killing rhinos, turning motor cars over. It was a disaster. And they found out the way to solve it was to just get bigger equipment and to bring in two massive old 40-year-old bulls. And they sorted it out immediately. And this is the same as our adolescent youngsters that used to go to military conscription. They get that same sorting out. And I wish we still had it today, because human adolescents are as miserable as young elephants. Anyway, in Punda Game Reserve, they had this problem as well with the misbehaving ellies. So these two chaps were selected from nearby in Tembe Elephant Park, and I think a lot of you will know that Tembe is renowned for having the big tuskers. They're genetically bigger than most. And these guys were selected, and we went in there early, did the hunting with a light sport aircraft, because the manager of Punda says there's no elephant in Zululand that hasn't had a bad experience with a helicopter. They're all that young, you know, in terms of having been reintroduced, that all of them, somewhere along the line, have taken a dart and been chased by a heli. So we learned now in those deep, thick sand forests, you go in there with a helicopter, those guys run in the sand forest and they don't come out again. Not until that helicopter's left the premises, you know. So we go with a light sport aircraft, which is whisper quiet, and we go in there, we find the elephant, and then the heli comes along straight onto him before he can run away, and bang, puts the dart in. But why go to all that trouble? And the reason for it is that when you come with the moving crew, whether it's 2 weeks or 2 months later, you come with a crew of 40 people, low bed trailers, huge heavy lift cranes and so on, and now start the search for the elephants. The search could go on for 2 weeks. So now, having pre-done the searching, we put the collar on, as you can see up on its neck there, and then when the movement crew is ready, they move on site. The very next morning, the heli goes out following the telemetry, bang, get the heli and dart him. Minimum fuss, minimum stress on the animal, and it's a quick move. So it goes for maximum efficiency. Again, South African game conservation operators are just absolutely world-class. They really are. And of course, it's now got the collar on, so when it gets to its new home, if it decides it's going back to where it came from, it can at least be followed and measures can be taken, because they need to know, is it staying within the area? We were told with this particular guy, he arrived in this harem of new ladies with lots of lolla palms, which is like candy floss for elephants, and they just settled straight away, so it was no problem. But anyway, there's the proud recipient. You see the tassels from the collar. I asked afterwards, why is that slack of those tassels not perhaps cut off? Is it not a bind for the elephant? And they assured me, no, that doesn't upset it in any way. And the reason why it stays is like the keel on a yacht. It makes sure that the telemetry and the GPS all stays up at the back. Otherwise, that would roll round to the front, and then you wouldn't get the signal. So leaving the tassels on there, can you believe, a silly little thing like that is of importance. Who doesn't know Gorongosa? Of course, we all know it. And when it was re-established some years ago, it was established that from 30 years back, there'd been no predators in Gorongosa. And the antelope species reintroduced themselves, or they rehabilitated the place, got it populated again. But predators were a problem. Now, how do you take predators like leopards or lions through all these border posts of southern African countries, spending 4 days on the road? It would be impossible. The animal would probably perish. And of course, each border post, you'd bring it to a complete standstill. You'd cause chaos when the customs officials come to check your load. So the way forward is to fly them. And we did that going back 10 years now, and took in a couple of packs of wild dogs, again, under the guidance of Andre Botha, who you heard from earlier on. Let's hear from him again, and he'll tell us about the story of the reintroduction for the first time in 30 years of carnivores into Gorongosa.
Basically double in size in the first year that they were there. That just gives you an indication. Again, it's your intervention, your support that made that possible.
Yeah, very interestingly with the wild dogs, you can't just take a couple of young fellas like this and put them into a new game reserve and say, well, there you go, you're in the land of milk and honey, And Andre tells us that Gorongosa was the land of milk and honey. He says that they put the first pack of wild dogs in there. The antelope had no idea what's a wild dog, and they actually stood there and watched their killers coming to them. But he says they wisened up pretty quickly. Nevertheless, the wild dogs repopulated and bred so well that on Sunday, I don't know if any of you here locally are aware of the move that occurred, but we are extremely proud of having done what we call a heritage flight, where after several flights of packs of wild dogs into neighboring countries, for the first time on Sunday, we brought a pack out of one of the neighboring countries back into South Africa, would you believe? And Welgevonden Game Reserve in Northwest Province, you're nodding there, you heard the story. Yeah. Welgevonden Game Reserve was known historically to have had wild dogs back in the day before they were all hunted and chased out. So it was good territory for them, and that pack has gone there to Welgevonden. So it's repopulating that corner of the country. And it's always done, by the way, as a complete family pack. As I was saying, you can't take 2 or 3 youngsters like this, put them in the game reserve and say, well, there, go have some fun. They'll perish because of that pack hierarchy. And, you know, the alpha male, alpha female, the coaching on hunting methodology and so on, it's a very intricate system that goes on with a wild dog. So they're always moved as a complete pack, which is, I think, very nice. You know, I think if you apply the human emotion, it's at least a good thing the family sticks together. Again, the same cares with all the other animals that are moved. And what's the white tube? The veterinarians are very good. They put the white tube there, which is a bit of down piping that they fashion together with some PVC cement, and a drip for each animal gets hung on the tube. It's perfect. And that drip keeps the animal hydrated during the transport. And then if they need to resedate or top up the sedative, it just goes into the little drip tube. So it all works. It's all very professionally handled. Pangolins. They are undoubtedly the world's most threatened mammal. And very, very sadly, they are little spoken about and far too little known about. You know, the rhino and its problem with poaching and trading in rhino horn is so publicized and so well known, and so much money's gone into it, and yet these poor fellas, because they're nocturnal and nobody sees them, their plight is not known. It doesn't reach the media, and yet it's so easy to poach one. You just walk up to it in the bush, lift it up and walk away. With a rhino, you got to have a big rifle for a start, which is illegal and unlicensed. Then you got to go into Big 5 territory at night, probably, to go and shoot your rhino. So rhino poaching is a very tough prospect for the poacher, if you think about it, whereas this is easy. So they do it, and a lot of it. And unfortunately, the numbers are in decline, and there are far less of them, apparently, than the rhino. And they will be extinct long before any rhinos are extinct. Where the Bateleurs get involved is when intel comes in that there is a recovered pangolin, has been, or a poacher's got a pangolin that they're holding. The conservationists get it back. We then get the call because the animal will always be in an emaciated condition. Reason being is the poacher can't feed it. Even if you wanted to, it eats ants, lives on ants. So it has to go very rapidly, as quickly as possible, to the Johannesburg Wildlife Veterinary Hospital, where they've worked out the formulae that sustain the animal, and they tube feed them, and they get them back up to weight and strength. They then get relocated, and we'll generally do that flight for them as well, which is a nice, easy flight. The pangolin sits next to you on the seat, and you take it to its new home. And they are the most adorable animals, they really are. There you see the rewilding fellow who's arrived with it, and they'll take about 10 to 12 days, I'm told, to get the animal settled in its new habitat. And would you believe the main reason for the settling is the ants that it's going to eat? Of everyone here this evening, a lot of the ladies will be doing white wine with a glass of ice on the side. Some guys, maybe some red wine. I'm drinking a beer. What do you got there, Jeff? A beer, yeah. So there's whiskey and water over there. So now these guys are the same. They'll only eat their preferred type of ant. And yet there's about 100 species, I'm told, or variations of ants. So what the rewilding guy does is he goes every evening, because it's a nocturnal animal, and he'll take it round the game reserve until it finally starts scratching and eating ants. Now he knows, voila, I've found the territory. And then he'll go back a couple of times to that same territory, and when the animal's finally settled, he'll release it. But let me show you something interesting. If you see the color of the scales and the rocks on the right-hand side, now you go at night with that animal, you turn your back for a second, it's gone. And if it hasn't found the right ants yet, well, it's going to now perish in that new home. So what he does, in order to not lose it, he puts a port and starboard light on it. Yeah, they just drill a little hole through one of the scales, a plastic cable tie, and he lights up the flashing lights. And then he follows, doing his bit of texting and this and that, and it looks around, oh, there goes my pangolin, and goes and chases it. So, a very neat idea. Of course, once it's completely settled on that last evening, you'll take a pair of side cutters, cut off the cable ties, and wish it well as it goes. That one-liner says it all. I'm not going to dwell on this other than the fact that there's a very, very sad situation that occurs in the modern world where money goes under the table in order to get a mining license, and the very person who probably rubber-stamped the license is the one who should be policing the fact that there was the rehabilitation of the territory after the mining, which is part of the issue of a mining license. You can't just wreak havoc with the landscape and then walk away. But these persons now can't go and prosecute the miner because he took how many million rand up front to issue the license. It's a nasty situation. And where we step into it is merely the observation and the reporting of this, and then with the media. The late Derek Watts, poor fellow, we lost him this year, but last year, carte blanche called on the Bateleurs. They needed to get into a mining area which was so sealed off to keep the zamas out that they couldn't get in there. And yet this mine was supposed to have put a purification plant on the tailings that were going into the Vaal River system, and they hadn't done it. It wasn't operating. So carte blanche did an expose, and of course it sorted the problem out. So we happily fly the media whenever we can. They've got a much, much louder voice than a Bateleur pilot has. So if we can get the media in the air and get their voice shouting, we do so. Marine animals, also little known about, very important. We learn with the annual sardine run that occurs in the KZN coast that penguins and seals follow the sardine run, and then their gyro goes tilt when they get to KZN. I don't know if the warm water impacts them or whatever, but they now get disoriented and they can't get home, and they get accumulated in groups. And in part of our process, this is maybe a good place to just mention what the process is of a conservationist or an environmentalist requiring a flight with the Bateleurs. They'll go on our website and submit an application. Our board of 7 directors then decide whether this, the application is legit, whether the organizations are legit, and whether all due processes like the permits, etc., have been put in place. We'll then give them the flight at no cost to the conservationist or the environmentalist. And when the applications came through for the initial penguins, one of our directors says, no. He says, I'm not in favor of executive transport for penguins, which was a very neat way of approaching it. But on our board of directors is Dr. Judy Mann, a marine a specialist scientist, and she quickly enlightened us on the fact that the penguins, like with the pangolin, there are less of them now, the African penguin, than rhinos. And they are not breeding as quickly as what the rhinos are. So we're going to see the extinction of the African penguin before we do that of the rhino. And she says we are in a place where every penguin counts. Well, of course, it got its executive transport. We do some follow-up and see that the animals we've moved have been okay, like the little lion cubs you saw earlier from a coalition of males that have been moved. And checking on the penguins, apparently they do all right as well. I stole that from Happy Feet, and I'm told that it's illegal. But please, nobody tell, okay? This turtle's name is Bob. And the type of turtle is a green turtle, a vegetarian, and they dive for their food. And it was found washed up on a Cape beach in a terrible condition, and it was established pretty quickly that it was unable to dive for its food. Why would that be? Yep, human plastic waste litter in the ocean. It had been seeing the plastic, assuming it to be food, eaten it, and blocked up the digestive tract. So anyway, Bob had the plastic surgically removed, and he became an ambassador for ocean plastic waste, whereby in the 3 years that he was at the aquarium in Cape Town, he was visited by busloads of kids. You know, a lot of schools use aquariums for their tours, and they would bring the kids there, and Bob became the ambassador for how dangerous the plastic waste is and the condition that he was left in. Nevertheless, when he was restored to good health, he had to be brought back to the KZN beaches. They didn't want to release him in the Cape, where he had found his way by accident, apparently. They wanted to relaunch him from their birthplace and brought him back to KZN. 4 days on the road would not have been good for him. And there is Bob's track having been released. And the tremendous travel, each color represents a month of recorded data coming back. And through all of that, it was found out that Bob is actually a lady and not a man. Nevertheless, Bob is happy and playing the oceans again. An interesting aspect here that when Bob was going to be flown home rather than driven, which would not be good for a turtle, we had to ask the question of, has anyone got experience of how a turtle behaves at 10,000 foot above sea level? They only ever go below sea level. So we were all absolutely convinced on the day of the transit that Bob was certainly the highest turtle in the world on that day. This fellow here is doing a fishing census, flies up and down the coast. I'm not going to go into too much detail, counts all the fishermen, the rock and surf anglers, and he does it on a busy day, let's say Easter holidays, and then he'll go on a miserable, windy, drizzly day during the week when there's hardly anyone, and he works out the total fishing count that comes out of the ocean, and they worked out tons of fish come out of the rock and surf angling, and that is the intertidal zone where all the breeding of these fish occur. So they then later on establish bag limits and seasons. And of course the fishermen say, bugger that, I'm going to continue fishing for shad into the breeding season. It's been scientifically worked out. It's not just at the whim of some fella that decides when we can and can't fish. It's been very carefully calculated. That particular Dr. Bruce, we would all jump in line to fly him. He conducted this survey. It was for a 3-month period, every 5th year, for over a 15-year period. So he did it 3 times. And in those days that he did it, of course, the Bateleur call-up would go out. And the way in which we do that is when a mission has been approved through the application process, a broadcast goes out to our pilot base that says, here's the flight we're doing. This is what's required. Here's the logistics. Who's keen? And 1, 2, or 3 pilots will put their hands up. With Bruce, there would always be about 5 hands going up. Because though we were doing it informally, there was no proper instruction happening, he loved flying. So as we came back from each mission, Bruce would take the stick and do it. He'd pole the aircraft, but that was only after having made coffee for the pilot. So everyone loved flying Bruce. You get good in-flight catering, and then he flies you home. This is an interesting one. A spreadsheet with all the known wattled crane nesting sites in the mist belt was sent to myself, in fact, and the tech is fantastic. I then took all of those sites, worked them into the most economic routing on the GPS, and then off we go to go and fly the mission with Tanya Smith from the Endangered Wildlife Trust. And of course, when this call came to me directly on this occasion, I was asked, would you go and fly to count birds' eggs in KZN? And I laughed. I said, I'm certain Wackhead Simpson is in the room with Nora who made the call. I'm being pranked. You can't count birds' eggs from the sky, but you absolutely can. And what happens is this bird with its very long legs goes into the upper reaches of the wetlands, and it rakes the reeds together and builds a mound. Mound, of course, becomes a nice dry, warm nesting position, but most importantly, as well as the moat that it's created, prevents the predators from getting to the bird. And then another aspect of what they do is they'll always lay 2 eggs, but one of them is going to land up lost or perish on the nest, because a wattle crane is an amazing bird. Unlike some where there'll just be a pink, limp little creature in a nest for numerous days, these things are mobile within a day or 2 of hatching, and the parents will take them off foraging, and the second egg gets abandoned. So with the bird numbers in decline, what Endangered Wildlife Trust were doing was harvesting that second egg, and she goes there wearing her waders, as you can see, into the wetland, gets the egg, and they'd go back to the Johannesburg Zoo, where there was a specialist wattle crane incubation and rearing program. And you must have seen those 50-50 programs, the human dressed in a stork suit, to prevent the bird imprinting on a human. So once they reared them to adolescent age, they'd get put back into the fields, back into the land where they'd come from. And the bird has actually been taken off the endangered list. So successful has been that program. And another one has been the red-billed oxpecker. And we'll hear again here from Andre Buerta of a similar success with the red-billed oxpeckers.
A number of missions in terms of our Operation Oxpecker, where you were instrumental in translocating batches of red-billed oxpeckers. In 2015, the red-billed oxpecker was delisted as a threatened species, and removed in any sense, and it was declassified to least concern as a species in South Africa.
How incredible is that from a conservation success story? From an animal on the endangered red list to delisted. That's absolutely fantastic. Andre, on that particular occasion, was our 19th birthday, 6 years ago. And the topic of his delivery was what the Bateleurs pilots have enabled. And he says he knows how pilots operate. We'll deliver the pack of wild dogs or the box of oxpeckers. We write up the flight folio and gap it for home. That's it, dusting our hands off, job done. He says what you don't realize is what you enabled by being part of the process. And a fantastic example of this was that there hadn't been birds of prey seen in Gorongosa for a long, long time, until after the reintroduction of the predators. Hello, with all the killing of the game, the vultures are sharp as anything. They arrived, they came back, and all species, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're the expert, but all species of the vultures have populated the Gorongosa area, where before you'd likely never ever see one. And this is what Andre would say is, you guys don't realize what you've enabled. It's tremendous conservation support that we provide to the bigger picture. Education, of course, we do that wherever we can as well, and get people schooled and skilled up and accustomed to the flying and the benefits of it. There was also a program in KZN where this lady would send out a calling for projects from rural schools on conservation, and whoever were the 10 top projects marked would come on a trip for a week in KZN, and they would then go to a rhino dehorning. They'd visit the Isimangalisa wetland. There's a butterfly dome where they're preserving rare species of butterflies. They'd go to that. So these kids would spend a week in Zululand visiting conservation projects, and little unknown to them was on the last day we would arrive and take them all for a flight. It was a loose formation, and we'd take them around the area where they've just done their week of study. And she always amusingly tells the story that when they get back home, they then have to write an essay and give a speech to their peers, to their own school, about this week's experience in conservation. And she says all they only want to talk about is the aviation. But that is great. You know, we all as pilots one day somewhere visited an air show or got a ride in an aeroplane, and that was it. We were driven to get that license, and then later on to do this kind of work. And we need to nurture this, because these are our conservationists of the next generation. Rhino, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. We all know about it. It's the scourge of rhino poaching. This is here's an image of a dehorned rhino. On the bottom right, lying next to it is perhaps even worse, is the calf that was badgering the poacher. The calf didn't have a horn big enough to warrant being shot, but because it was badgering the poachers running around its mother, they killed it before it charged or hurt them. It's absolutely terrible. One thing that is beneficial, though, in this ugly picture is that it's been declared a priority crime. And ballistics, DNA are taken from every occasion of there being a poaching. And at the end of the day, a lot of good is being done. There are tremendous rhino revolution. Where are you? Yeah. Dedicated work being done by tremendous people, and a lot of money being put into the prevention of this rhino poaching. So long may that live. I went back there a year after taking those initial photos, and it was a very heart-sore moment to fly back past that same site, and this iconic Big Five animal was now just bones in the veld. It's absolutely bloody terrible. Countermeasures are taken. Of course, the dehornings are all done very professionally. This particular team, I was part of this team, we did 30 in 2 days. And it was in the middle of COVID. There was a lockdown on aviation and travel, as you know, during the lockdowns. And we got a special dispensation, what were the essential services permit for conservation. So while all the mates were hanged and flying flight simulator, we went and dehorned 30 rhinos. It was brilliant. And that's the track after the task. Looks like the work of a drunken spider. It was a lot of hard work. This was something that happened very, very recently. It's not yet for public consumption. Turn your camera off. I'm not going to mention any names, but this is in vitro fertilization for rhinos. This is now really going top tech in terms of the rhino conservation story. I spent a couple of days with these folks, and I'm not going to even say where, because we haven't been given the green light yet to go ahead, but I had to include it here. It is just so fantastic that fertile eggs are removed from a rhino cow. They are taken to a laboratory where sperm from bulls has come from another game reserve. So straight away, here we're into a game of genetic diversity. The in vitro fertilization occurs. The fetus is then, or the embryo, I should rather say, is reimplanted into a cow, and it doesn't have to be the same cow. It can be a cow now in a third game reserve. You figure out all the fantastic permutations that can be worked from this, and at the time of downing that cow with a dart in order to implant the embryo, dehorn her. So now what we've got is a cow in the veldt, unattractive to a poacher because it's got no horn and it's pregnant. This is brilliant stuff. It really, really is. Here they've got this thing that looks like a spear gun in the rear end of the rhino. Let me tell you, it was something to behold. But they've got a scanner that are used by a lot of pediatricians to scan, a fetus in humans. And they've got the same scanner. They found the eggs and extract them. It was really something else. And there you can see the jubilation when they see on the screen they found follicles on the ovaries that have got the eggs, and they then flush them out. There's yours truly doing a very, very important task. It's called rhino tail holding. And the vet did tell me, after my long suffering studying of this particular skill, that if I let the tail go and he gets a slap in the face from a wet rhino tail, I'm going to be fired. So another one of our colleagues, the amount of flushing that occurs in the back of that rhino is something to behold. It's done from a little water cart trailer that comes on site. And of course, you can't have the poor vet now operating in a puddle of water. So here was Claude, one of our top pilots. He's gone from piloting to now being a sand digger to flow the water away. But that's what goes on in the day of the life of a Bateleur pilot. It really is. It can be huge fun. This adolescent bull was now very concerned that his mother had been corralled on the inside for this operation to be carried out on her. And he kept running up and down the fence line where we were waiting to get inside once she'd settled from the dart. Well, of course, it got very exciting when the only cover you've got is a little motorbike and this crazy rhino running up and down. And there's the delivery. The boxes were very high tech, amazing. The box keeps the eggs, oocytes they are called, keeps the oocyte at rhino temperature. And of course, the reason for the Bateleur involvement here is that these eggs are extremely time and temperature sensitive. The transport by road would never work, simply wouldn't work. So they needed executive transport for rhino eggs. It really was fantastic. And the recipient there on the right-hand side reported that every box delivered produced suitable eggs for him to do the IVF. So it was a tremendous contribution that we made there. That's their laboratory in here in the bottom right-hand corner. To remain focused, they've got a little fluffy toy of a rhino, just so they know what they're working with. Is that because I'm over time? By the way, when I see this particular picture, I know we're reaching the end, folks. So thanks for not nodding off. And this is some of the fun stuff. We talk about serious, ugly stuff, rhino poaching and saving pangolins and so on. But here what we see is some of the fun we get involved in. Of course, why go away and work for any period of time in the game reserve if you're not going to enjoy yourself? And here's just a picture shot of an ellie while we're driving home from the airfield to our lodgings. And we discovered that these ellies in this game reserve are actually literate. Not one of them has ever exceeded 50 k's an hour. But shame, this little guy, also on a drive home from the airfield, the fellow who's giving me a ride, I say to him, stop, stop, and he skids the vehicle to a stop. What have you seen? What have you seen? He's expecting some leopard draped over a branch somewhere in a tree. So I said to him, no, no, no. And I get out and I run back because I'd seen this chameleon on the road. But when I got back to it, it was still absolutely transfixed with this terror of a vehicle having passed overhead. So there he sits, mortified. Anyway, he got put carefully in the bush and we carried on. It was quite fun. Now this was interesting, is that a lot of foreigners who come to these 10 to 15,000 rand per bed night resorts, of which you probably are managers of some of them and know this stuff, these guys, they have to have serviced runways. The insurances won't allow them to go into bush strips, so it must have air traffic control and services, paramedics, firefighting, etc. So Pinder Game Reserve, which this is, they got very inventive. They had one of the ladies in the office go and do her restricted radio license course, so that took care of the air traffic control. And then they hired the Matuba Fire Brigade. So now, who pays for this municipal fire brigade to come do this? I don't know, and I didn't ask, and I'm not going to ask. But anyway, this, you can see that beautiful African smile. This guy was just the most delightful character, and he comes to the plane and starts asking questions. So I have him take a seat, and he now wants to know, what does this do? What does that do? And we spent a half an hour together, and when these two large executive aircraft had been dispatched, he thanked me very much. He's going back to Matuba. So I said, are you in a hurry? Are you going back for anything special? No, he says he's just going back. I said, well, good, come. And I took him on tour the neighborhood. And he was absolutely blown away. He'd never in his life conceived of the fact that he would land up going for a flight in a small aeroplane. And as they say, one good turn deserves another. So when we landed, my little flea got a hose down, courtesy of that very red sand that you see there. It turned it from blue and white to blue and pink. So there's white again, thanks to the hosing that I got. And of course, we have some nice times in the bush. Here sitting, enjoying a boma bra after a lot of work, and then eventually heading home, which always happens nice and early in the morning, cleared by the air traffic controller. And what's not to like? And flying through the Zululand Mhlosingas in the early morning mist. That is just such an out-of-Africa pic. It's just beautiful. And maybe looking a little worse for wear, pointing for home. And then, of course, you can see from that pic that I do have a fridge in the hangar. I always have a pint or two before I go flying. I'm shit scared of heights, excuse me. Right now, what presentation would not be worth its salt without a little commercial? You'll have to forgive me. We're right at the end, so it's only another 5 minutes before we all get another pooza. But how about flying with us? Of course, one of the big things in a presentation like this is to attract pilots to come and join us. We do lose pilots through attrition. During the COVID era, anyone who was involved in the hospitality industry, and a lot of you people felt that bite during the lockdowns when there were no more bums in beds, and they lost their aircraft, unable to fly, so we've had those sort of impacts, and we need to replenish pilots all the time. So please, if you know of somebody, doesn't matter where they're located, here we see a tremendous concentration of pilots in Johannesburg where no conservation happens, but that's where the money is. So we don't mind. If they have to fly to the coast or to the Cape to do a task, they'll do that. So we're trying to fill up the places. The Eastern Cape, as you can see, is very thin on pilots. There's no little red aeroplanes there. And yet the Eastern Cape is possibly the fastest growing conservation node in South Africa. It's been an untapped area thus far. So acquiring ground and establishing game reserves is actually relatively cheap compared to if you wanted to try and do it here in Hoedspruit. And we're thin on pilots there. So it always helps to get the pilot recruitment going. That's easily done on our website. Just go to the Fly for Us and fill in the online form with a copy of your logbook and your license, and you send it through. And there are some requirements. I'm not going to get into all the details now, but like commercial pilots need 200 hours in order to go flying commercially, we want the same thing before a person's going to come fly, the Bateleurs. We don't want you doing tight orbits around a tree, trying to flush a rhino out from in the shade where you want to see if it's been dehorned or not. And all you've ever done is flown from paved runway to paved runway. You're going to come unstuck quickly. So we need some depth of experience, but we'll get into that when you put your application in. Conservationists, and I would hope that half the room or more are conservationists this evening. If you have need of aerial support, then please jump in there. And we have that little process. I alluded to it earlier. Let's say those line moves that you saw earlier. Imagine if we moved lines using donor funding to do so, and the tremendous support of our pilots, only to find out we've just moved them to a canned lion hunting farm. Geez, perish the thought. So we make sure in the application process from the conservationists that it is a real need, it's for the greater good of conservation in the country, and that the operators, whoever's involved, are legit and the permits are in place. How can you support us? Well, one thing there that you see immediately, and I mentioned it earlier with our pilots, we've got a tremendous system whereby the pilots are the greatest contributors. And the way in which that works is when a pilot's visited each neighboring airfield for the world's most expensive cup of coffee, and he's done it 10 times and it starts lacking luster, he looks for something more meaningful to do. And that's when you hear these fellas go to doing the hangar talk after a Bateleur flight. They enthuse at great length. They come home with a tremendous sense of fulfillment, And then they say, and the Bateleurs paid for my fuel nogal. Can you believe it? You know, so it's from that point of view, it's an easy recruiting operation. But where this really counts for an NGO is that every other NGO that we know of has essentially got that outstretched hand of Africa with the funding running like water through their fingers. We, in fact, are exceptionally different, whereby aviation, as you all know, is extremely well recorded. You've got the pilot's logbook, the flight folio for the aircraft. All this imagery comes from the flying that happens. So we've got total accountability. We audit it every year, and yet the pilot will come along and we give them only the fuel compensation. The other 2/3 of the cost per running hour, the cost of running an aircraft, is coming from the pilot. Okay, so an aeroplane running at 3,000 Rand an hour, only 1,000 Rand of that is the fuel burn. The other 2,000 is the maintenance, the licenses, the hangarage, the insurances, etc. The pilot is bringing that to the party. So if you give us 100,000 Rand in donor funding, we'll essentially put back 300,000 Rands worth of money into conservation. It's an exceptional story as NGOs go. We call it the multiplier effect. Anyway, if you want to support us, please, there's mechanisms on the website where you can jump on there. I also even brought my Zapper. Come with your cell phone and misplace where you put the decimal point, please. By the way, there's another thing we're going to do. Laurel's going to help me afterwards. We've got some very lekker caps. And don't say you don't have cash. By the way, speaking of fundraising, I'm gonna hold an auction in a moment. So if you are fearful of spending, you don't actually want to run now. There's a nice, easy way to support the Bateleurs. Who shops at Woolies? Do you have one in Hoedspruit? Uh-oh. Who said thank God? No, really, Woolworths, they started with the My School program that evolved to become the My Planet program as well, and the Bateleurs are one of the beneficiaries. So all you do is go with your Woolies My Planet card, and every time you shop, for every 100 Rand you spend, Woolies gives us a Rand back. And if we've got 50,000 people doing that, we'll be styling. So please, share the story, you know, with friends and family. Just go on the website and make the Bateleurs your beneficiary in terms of your My Planet card. We also have associations. This one-liner says we practice friend raising, not fundraising, because in today's embattled economy, you say fundraising, people dive in their trenches and they don't bring their heads up again. So, but if you have a way of associating with us, and here we have one of them, for example, on the right-hand side is Uzwelo bags. They make the most tremendous range of bags from a surplus fabric that would have landed up in the municipal tip site, and they make up these bags, and for every bag sold, they give 5 Rand to the Bateleurs. So it's a fantastic win-win. They're doing an environmental job, they're employing people, and they're not wasting, and we're getting something out of it. Aviation Direct will be well known to all aviators. Our navigating of our flights is done courtesy of Aviation Direct. It's tremendous, moving map, full, rich data stuff. Here we see Wayne Farvey, ex-famous Springbok rugby player, and he owns Fastway Couriers. And he kind of said, hey, chaps, in a post-COVID economy, I can't give you any big handouts, but what I can do is I've got trucks crisscrossing the country every night. Anything you need sent around the country, give it to us. We'll transport it for you. So that's another little box ticked. It's our association that takes care of any postal cost. And what we do is we have, and I'm going to go on a digression now. Watch this. This box here is a pilot care package, we call it. When a pilot has gone above and beyond the call of duty, they get awarded with a green cap. And I'm going to do one right now. Okay. This is very special. You know all about the Green Berets in America, famous elite unit. In the Bateleurs, we've only awarded 14 green caps in our 25-year history. Fastway Couriers always transports it, and I alert the pilot on the day preceding. I say, you're getting a parcel from us. He's got no idea what it'll be. But I said, while the courier's there, please get a photo of the handover with a courier truck hopefully in the background of you receiving your parcel. And then there's a hat in the parcel. Put it on and I want you to shoot a selfie. Well, of course, we share that material back with Fastway, who put it on their website. They love it. They say, we've supported our Bateleurs, our favorite NGO, and we transport it to this fantastic pilot fella. We likewise do the same thing amongst our 7,000 social media followers, and everybody gets tremendous mileage out of it. Anyway, as I said, a pilot doesn't just go and do the task because they willingly want to do that anyway. It's when a pilot has gone above and beyond the call of duty and just goes the extra mile, whether that's in the flying or by some other method, then they have earned themselves the green cap. And Marlon Lewinsky, where are you? Approach, Marlon. Yes.
You shot. This is Hoedspruit's go-to guy for the Bateleurs. And it's not from kilometers and hours and hectic flying, but when you need something done or something taken care of, he just dives in. It's like nothing is too big of a problem. Setting up this visit, we stayed with him our first 2 days in Hoedspruit, courtesy of Marlon. He transported one of those pangolins that you see. The transport of the pangolin from its rehabilitation back to its rewilding last week. So, and we were going to do a flight for a trust company, a bunch of conservation environmentalists yesterday. There he was on the airfield again. So nothing's too much trouble for Marlon.
I cannot say enough about Steve.
Oh,
Absolute scholar and a gentleman, and the work that he does is just, it's, you know, I don't even have words to explain what a good man is.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for
Wow,
Well, here we go.
what a surprise.
Thank you, Mom.
Glad I pitched up tonight.
Yeah, we can, a photo moment.
And a handshake.
Handshake costs extra. By the way, that lion comment with the mask, COVID comment, that was me.
By the way, the pilot care packages, courtesy of a Bateleur pilot, is a jiggler siphon, and it's even engraved, the Bateleurs. On an aluminium jiggler. There's a tie-down kit of pegs, ropes, and a hammer. I'm told that the hammer's Chinese. The first person who got confirmed the next day and said the first thing they went to hammer is just smash the hammer. And these days, you can't walk on a municipal airfield without your day glow jacket. So, courtesy of brand uniforms, pilot jackets with embroidery on it of the Bateleurs.
That serves a dual purpose when my wife kicks me out of the house. You can find me on the wildlife estate when I'm roaming around.
Yes. And keep your car full. Yeah. Who knows Sean Cronin, Bateleur pilot from Northwest Province? His engineering, blue tech engineering. Sean provides us with the jiggers. So these are all, everything in the bag is from the associations we have, including the Uzwelo bag. And as you can see, no Uzwelo bag, no two bags are the same. Every single one is different from the way they put them together. There we go.
Thank you very much. I am, and just, you know, there's nothing more I could do to serve a man like this because he's a scholar and a gentleman. Not that he does, it's too much.
Okay, back to business. Our NGO is Section 18A registered with SARS, so any contributions made can be 100% tax deductible within certain parameters and limitations, but at least it's there. So if anyone knows of a corporate who's looking for a damn good, solid corporate social investment partner, like the Bateleurs, and as I said, well audited and taken care of, that also becomes totally deductible for that company. I'm sure that Sean's jiggler siphons have all been taken off from the bottom line as a tax deductible contribution, so that's how it works. We are wishing to make a book. Everyone knows about the Sasol Book of Birds in South Africa. Well, we want to have the whatever, the Glutech Engineering or the whatever book, and what you've seen here this evening will become in the covers of a book. All that same sort of imagery with captions, extended captions, which tells the 25-year story of the Bateleurs. So when we find somebody who's prepared to be the partner on the book, we've got most of the content already all lined up, and it'll be fantastic to get that going as a coffee table book. That is my last image. The final thing we're going to do is a quick knife auction. But my final image says, please share our story. And that is the greatest thing we can ask of you. If you can't join the Woolies My Planet program, because there's no Woolies in Hoedspruit, at least share our story with your cousin, auntie, uncle who lives in the city in Joburg, Cape Town, or wherever, who does go shopping at Woolies. Recruit some pilots for us. Share with the pilots. I don't think there are pilots in South Africa who don't know about the Bateleurs, but you never can tell. So please share the story. The pilots love to fly with a purpose rather than just aimlessly flying. So there we go. This knife, by the way, not unlike all the contents of the goodie bag, was kindly given to us by a top knife maker, Bradley Winant is his name. The most beautiful handcrafted knife. I believe that they have price tags on them of 5,000 Rand and upwards. The cost of the materials alone just exceeds 2,000 Rand. So I don't know how brave you are here now for us to turn this room into Sotheby's, and we start at the 2,000 Rand. But let me show you the knife. It's in a beautiful hand-sewn leather scabbard. There we go. It would be fantastic as a hunting support knife, skinning knife, biltong, whatever. And on the bolsters, as they call it, the two metal parts of the top, is the Bateleur B in its logo. And it's the only one that's been made like that. He did it for us for our 25th anniversary now. By the way, the Bateleurs on the 8th of September was the official registration day of its 25 years in existence. How cool is that? So anyway, there's only one of these. Thank you. So, who's going to put their hand up? And this, of course, is not just the acquisition of a knife. This is a support of the Bateleurs, more so than the acquisition of the knife. And the rarity value, I want to see some brisk bidding. Who's starting? Anyone starting? Well done. At the two that we mentioned. Thank you, sir. There we go. And if there's nobody as brave as you, you're about to pick up 5,000 Rands worth of knife for two. Yeah. Okay. There we go. Thank you very much. There. We have a bid for 3. 3-5. Thank you for that. And I must stop waving it around like that. Just now, it's dropped something. I think if you hold it and you see it, you might increase your bid. We got 3-5 in the corner.
Armed and dangerous.
Armed and dangerous. 3-5 in the corner. Okay. I bet you're all thirsty and hungry. We're going to let this go now. The last 3-5. You're going to come visit me later. Thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am. 4. We have 4. And I've got a credit card machine for those of you who weren't carrying that much cash.
4-5.
Who said 4-5? Okay, thank you very much. 4-5. There we go. By the way, here's something. My math isn't good at 4-5, but at 4, I can tell you now that that is 12,000 Rands worth of fuel contribution. Well, at 4,000, purchased in the form of fuel for a pilot, that's going to be 12,000 Rands worth of aviation put back into conservation. So it's fantastic. Your contribution is very welcomed and will get put to very good use. Thank you. Is that it? 4-5. Fantastic. Was it the last little bit where it's going to turn into 15,000 Rand into conservation? Thank you. Okay. What happened?
5-5.
Oh my soul. Got you at 5-5. Thank you for that. Right, don't run away. I've got 2 Bateleur caps I'm handing over. They will not be green caps. That only goes to the Marlins of this world, but I've got another 2 that I'm going to give away in any event. But 5-5, thank you, sir. Come and chat to me afterwards. Well done. Laurel's going to be helping me to sell these at 200 Rand each, which I'm told is a perfectly reasonable price for a peak cap these days. The nice part is that Headwear is the name of the organization. You need peak caps for your game estates or your flying clubs. Remember the name Headwear, or give me a shout. I'll put you in touch with them. They gave us the caps, not unlike the knife. The 200 Rand for the cap, of course, goes straight into the Bateleurs for the greater good of the work that we do. But Corin, I'm calling you up here. Corin Heinen, it was thanks to Corin and her enthusiasm that made the Bateleurs part of the roadshow come together. So there's a khaki colored one. And
Thank you so much.
you're very welcome.
John.
This, the Mr. MC, the guy who makes it all happen here, for the benefit of the thirsty giraffe and for conservation on the whole, he's doing this outside of his Endangered Wildlife Trust employment portfolio. And that is fantastic. The Bateleurs thanks you. Pick yourself a cap.
Gonna have to go with that color.
Yeah, and I can see you're a cap operator. I'm giving this back to you.
Perfect. Thank you firstly to Steve. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm sure everybody had a wonderful evening. So just before we lastly wrap up, I just want to check if anybody has any questions. We're just going to have a quick 5-minute Q&A. And then after that, if anybody maybe tracks Steve down once we clear the area for Thirsty Giraffe. So any questions so far for Steve?
I must have explained it all very well.
I was going to say, I think you're off the hook. Did we have a question in the corner somewhere? All right, Carl Middleton, can I give you the mic?
Thanks for the presentation, Steve. I'm wondering if there are any animals that have issues with being transported at a high altitude that you've worked with.
Well, we've checked on the pangolins.
The pangolins could be sensitive to the rarefication of the air at altitude. But of course it was Bob the turtle that we had a very genuine concern about. So he goes in an unpressurized aircraft, and from being accustomed to living only ever at sea level, and there's no genetic disposition towards being at altitude. So we were worried about that. Yeah, but we were told that that was quite safe. Yeah. A question that does come from aviators quite often is what happens to my insurance in the aircraft? The insurer is assuming you're just going from A to B, from paved runway to paved runway, under air traffic control and flight plans and everything like that. Now you're going to go and do this crazy stuff. Does that change anything? And it doesn't, fortunately. So we've been to the bigger insurers in South Africa, and they don't have an issue with it. And one of the main reasons is the qualification level that we place on the pilots. So that is something that ticks a box in that regard, yeah. And when it comes to issues of fueling, we of course know that a pilot would be paranoid about the clinical cleanliness of a fueling environment. One grain of grit in the inlet jet of a carburetor is going to ruin your morning. So we make sure that any support with fueling infield is very professionally taken care of. But these are all piloting issues that we can talk about with the pilots as they come along and make their application. But any other issues like that might arise, or questions that might come, you're welcome to come afterwards while we're rehydrating after all that talking. And I'm happy to engage and answer any questions. Otherwise, I think it's a case of, as John said, we've cleared the floor so that the tables can be set for the evening dinner. And really, very many thanks to you folks for hosting. Appreciate it.